chapter 31. If you remember, the rain, or the faucets from the clouds, had just cleaned off the centipede. And now we're on to chapter 31. "How fast we are going all of a sudden," the ladybug said. "I wonder why." "I don't think the seagulls like this place any better than we do," James answered. "I imagine they want to get out of it as soon as they can. They got a bad fright in the storm we've just been through." Faster and faster flew the seagulls, skimming across the sky at tremendous pace, with the Peach trailing out behind them. Cloud after cloud went by on either side, all of them ghostly white in the moonlight, and several more times during the night the travelers caught glimpses of cloudmen moving around on the tops of these clouds, working their sinister magic upon the world below. Once they passed a snow machine in operation, with the cloudmen turning the handle of a blizzard. Once they passed a snow machine in operation, with the cloudmen turning the handle and a blizzard of snowflakes blowing out of a great funnel above. They saw the huge drums that were used for making thunder, and the cloudmen beating them furiously with long hammers. They saw the frost factories and the wind producers, and the places where cyclones and tornadoes were manufactured and sent spinning downward toward the earth. And once, deep in the hollow of a large billowy cloud, they spotted something that could have only been a cloudmen's city. There were caves everywhere, running into the cloud. And at the entrance to the caves, the cloudmen's wives were crouching over little stoves with frying pans in their hands, frying snowballs for their husband's supper. And hundreds of cloudmen's children were frisking about all over the place, and shrieking with laughter and sliding down the billows of the cloud on toboggans. An hour later, just before dawn, the travelers heard a soft whooshing noise above their heads, and they glanced up and saw an immense gray bat-like creature swooping down toward them out of the dark. It circled around and around the Peach, flapping its great wings slowly in the moonlight, and staring at the travelers. Then it uttered a series of long, deep, melancholy cries, and flew off again into the night. "Oh, I do wish the morning would come," Miss Spider said, shivering all over. "It won't be long now," James answered. "Look, it's getting lighter over there already." They all sat in silence, watching the sun as it came up slowly over the rim of the horizon for a new day. And there's the strange bat-like creature. And the Peach and the seagulls and the clouds. Chapter 32. And when full daylight came at last, they all got to their feet and stretched their poor cramped bodies. And then the centipede, who always seemed to see things first, shouted, "Look, there's land below." "He's right," they cried, running to the edge of the Peach and peering over it. "Hooray, hooray! It looks like streets and houses, but how enormous it all is." A vast city, glistening in the earthly morning sunshine, lay spread out 3,000 feet below them. At that height, the cars were like little beetles crawling along the streets, and people walking on the pavements looked no larger than tiny grains of soot. "But what tremendous tall buildings!" exclaimed the ladybug. "I've never seen anything like them before in England." "Which town do you think this is?" "This couldn't possibly be England," said the old green grasshopper. "Then where is it?" asked Miss Spider. "You know what those buildings are?" shouted James, jumping up and down with excitement. "Those are skyscrapers, so this must be America. And that, my friends, means that we have crossed the Atlantic Ocean overnight." "You don't mean it," they cried. "It's not possible. It's incredible. It's unbelievable." "Oh, I've always dreamed of going to America," cried the centipede. "I had a friend once who—" "Be quiet," said the earthworm. "Who cares about your friend? The thing we've got to think about now is how on earth are we going to get down to earth?" "Ask James," said the ladybug. "I don't think that should be so very difficult," James told them. "All we have to do is cut loose a few seagulls. Not too many, mind you, but just enough so that the others can't quite keep us up in the air. Then down we shall go, slowly and gently, until we reach the ground. Centipede will bite through the strings for us one at a time." Chapter 33. Far below them in the city of New York, something like pandemonium was breaking out. A great round ball as big as a house had been sighted hovering high up in the sky over the very center of Manhattan. And the cry had gone up that it was an enormous bomb sent over by another country to blow the whole city to smithereens. Air raid sirens began wailing in every direction. All radio and television programs were interrupted with announcements that the population must go down into their cellars immediately. 1 million people walking in the streets on their way to work looked up into the sky and saw the monster hovering above them, and started running for the nearest subway entrance to take cover. Generals grabbed hold of telephones and shouted orders to everyone they could think of. The mayor of New York called up the President of the United States down in Washington, D.C., to ask him for help. And the President, who at that moment was having breakfast in his pajamas, quickly pushed away his half-finished plate of Sugar Crisps and started pressing buttons right and left to summon his admirals and his generals. And all the way across the vast stretch of America, in all the 50 states, from Alaska to Florida, from Pennsylvania to Hawaii, the alarm was sounded, and the word went out that the biggest bomb in the history of the world was hovering over New York City, and that any moment it might go off. But they didn't realize it was just a giant peach. There's the skyscrapers and the giant peach. "Come on, Centipede, bite through the first string," James ordered. The centipede took one of the silk strings between his teeth and bit through it. And once again, but not with an angry cloud man dangling from the end of the string this time, a single seagull came away from the rest of the flock and went flying off on its own. "Bite another," James ordered. The centipede bit through another string. "Why aren't we sinking?" "We are sinking." "No, we're not." "Don't forget the peach is a lot lighter now than when we started out," James told them. "It lost an awful lot of juice when all those hailstones hit it in the night." "Cut away 2 more seagulls, Centipede." "Ah, that's better. Here we go. Now we're really sinking." "Yes, this is perfect. Don't bite any more, Centipede, or we'll sink too fast. Gently does it." Slowly, the great peach began losing height, and the buildings and streets down below began coming closer and closer. "Do you think we'll all get our pictures in the paper when we get down?" the ladybug asked. "My goodness, I've forgotten to polish my boots," the centipede said. "Everyone must help me to polish my boots before we arrive." "Oh, for heaven's sake," said the earthworm. "Can't you ever stop thinking about—" But he never finished his sentence, for suddenly, whoosh, and they looked up and saw a huge 4-engined plane come shooting out of a nearby cloud and go whizzing past them not more than 20 feet over their heads. This was actually the regular early morning passenger plane coming into New York from Chicago, and as it went by, it sliced right through every single one of the silken strings, and immediately the seagulls broke away, and the enormous peach, having nothing to hold it up in the air any longer, went tumbling down toward the earth like a lump of lead. "Help!" cried the centipede. "Save us!" cried Miss Spider. "We are lost!" cried the ladybug. "This is the end!" the old green grasshopper cried. "James!" cried the earthworm. "Do something, James! Quickly, do something!" "I can't!" cried James. "I'm sorry. Goodbye. Shut your eyes, everybody. It won't be long now." And chapter 35 is next. Round and round, upside down, went the peach as it plummeted toward the earth, and they were all clinging desperately to the stem to save themselves from being flung into space. Faster and faster it fell, down and down and down, racing closer and closer to the houses and streets below, where it would surely smash into a million pieces when it hit. And all the way along Fifth Avenue and Madison Avenue, and along all the other streets in the city, people who had not yet reached the underground shelters looked up and saw it coming, and they stopped running and stood there staring in a sort of stupor at what they thought was the biggest bomb in all the world falling out of the sky onto their heads. A few women screamed, others knelt down on the sidewalks and began praying aloud. Strong men turned to one another and said things like, "I guess this is it, Joe. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye." And for the next 30 seconds, the whole city held its breath, waiting for the end to come. Goodbye, Ladybug. Oh, sorry, the next chapter, 36. Goodbye, Ladybug, gasped James, clinging to the stem of the falling peach. Goodbye, Centipede. Goodbye, everybody. There were only a few seconds to go now. And it looked as though they were going to fall right in among all the tallest buildings. James could see the skyscrapers rushing up to meet them at the most awful speed, and most of them had square, flat tops. But the very tallest of them all, had a top that tapered off into a long, sharp point, like an enormous silver needle sticking up into the sky, and it was precisely onto the top of this needle that the peach fell. There was a squelch. The needle went in deep, and suddenly there was a giant peach caught and spiked upon the very pinnacle of the Empire State Building. That was sure a lucky landing. Chapter 37. It was really an amazing sight, and in 2 or 3 minutes, as soon as the people below realized that this now couldn't possibly be a bomb, they came pouring out of the shelters and the subways to gape at this marvel. The streets for half a mile around the building were jammed with men and women, and when the word spread that there were actually living things moving about on the top of that great round ball, then everyone went wild with excitement. It's a flying saucer, they shouted. They are from outer space. They are men from Mars. Or maybe they came from the moon. A man who had a pair of binoculars to his eyes said, "They look pretty peculiar to me, I tell you that." Police cars and fire engines came screaming in from all over the city and pulled up outside the Empire State Building. 200 firemen and 600 policemen swarmed into the building and went up the elevators as high as they could go. Then they poured out onto the observation roof, which is the place where tourists stand, just at the bottom of the big spike. I just want to stop for a second and say this book was written in a time when police officers were called policemen and firefighters were called firemen. But of course we know now that men and women can do these jobs, and we no longer say policemen and firemen, but that's what it says in the book. Anyways. All the policemen were holding their guns at the ready with their fingers on the trigger, and the firemen were clutching their hatchets, but from where they stood, almost directly underneath the peach, they couldn't actually see the travelers up on top. "Ahoy there!" shouted the chief of police. "Come out and show yourselves." Suddenly, the great brown head of the centipede appeared over the side of the peach. His black eyes, as large and round as 2 marbles, glared down at the policemen and the firemen below. Then his monstrous, ugly face broke into a wide grin. The policemen and the firemen all started shouting at once. "Look out," they cried. "It's a dragon." "It's not a dragon. It's a wampus. It's a gorgon. It's a sea serpent. It's a proc. It's a manticore." 3 firemen and 5 policemen fainted and had to be carried away. "It's a snozwanger," cried the chief of police. "It's a wang-doodle," yelled the head of the fire department. The centipede kept on grinning. He seemed to be enjoying enormously the commotion that he was causing. "Now see here," shouted the chief of police, cupping his hands to his mouth. "You listen to me. I want you to tell me exactly where you've come from." "We've come from thousands of miles away," the centipede shouted back, grinning more broadly than ever and showing his brown teeth. "There you are," cried the chief of police. "I told you they came from Mars." "I guess you're right," said the head of the fire department. At this point, the old green grasshopper poked his huge green head over the side of the peach, alongside the centipede's. 6 more big, strong men fainted when they saw him. That's an Onik," screamed the head of the fire department. "I just know it's an Onik. Oinik, or a Oinik. I'm not sure how to say that." "Or a cockatrice," yelled the chief of police. "Stand back, men. It may jump down on us at any moment." "What on earth are they talking about?" the old green grasshopper said to the centipede. "Search me," the centipede answered, "but they seem to be in an awful stew about something." Then Miss Spider's large, black, murderous-looking head which to a stranger was probably the most terrifying of all, appeared next to the grasshoppers. "Snakes and ladders!" yelled the head of the fire department. "We are finished now. It's a giant scorpula." "It's worse than that," cried the chief of police. "It's a vermiculous knid." Vermicious knid. "Oh, just look at its vermicious, gruesome face. Is that the kind that eats fully grown men for breakfast?" the head of the fire department asked, going white as a sheet. "I'm afraid it is," the chief of police answered. "Oh, please, why doesn't someone help us to get down from here?" Miss Spider called out. "It's making me giddy." "This could be a trick," the head of the fire department said. "Don't anyone make a move until I say." "They've probably got space guns," muttered the chief of police. "But we've got to do something," the head of the fire department announced grimly. "About 5 million people are standing down there on the streets watching us." "Then why don't you put up a ladder?" the chief of police asked him. "I'll stand at the bottom and hold it steady for you while you go up and see what's happening." "Thanks very much," snapped the head of the fire department. Soon there were no less than 7 large, fantastic faces peering down over the side of the peach. The centipedes, the old green grasshoppers, Miss Spiders, the earthworms, the ladybugs, the silkworms, and the glowworms. And a sort of panic was beginning to break out among the firemen and the policemen on the rooftop. Then, all at once, the panic stopped, and a great gasp of astonishment went up all around, for now a small boy was seen to be standing up there beside the other creatures. His hair was blowing in the wind, and he was laughing and waving and calling out, "Hello, everybody, hello!" For a few moments, the men below just stood and stared and gaped. They simply could not believe their eyes. "Bless my soul," cried the head of the fire department, going red in the face. "It really is a little boy, isn't it?" "Don't be frightened of us, please," James called out. "We are so glad to be here. What about those others beside you?" And here you can see the police officers and firefighters fainted because they were so scared. "What about those others beside you?" shouted the chief of police. "Are any of them dangerous?" "Of course they're not dangerous," James answered. "They're the nicest creatures in the world. Allow me to introduce them to you one by one, and then I'm sure you will believe me. My friends, this is the centipede, and let me make it known. He is so sweet and gentle, although he's overgrown. The Queen of Spain again and again has summoned him by phone to babysit and knit and be a chaperone. When nurse is off and all the royal children are alone, small wonder, said a fireman, they're no longer on the throne. The earthworm, on the other hand, said James, beginning to expand, is great for digging up the land and making old soils newer. Moreover, you should understand, he would be absolutely grand for digging subway tunnels and for making you a sewer. The earthworm blushed and beamed with pride. Miss Spider clapped and cheered and cried. Could any words be truer? And the grasshopper, ladies and gents, is a boon in millions and millions of ways. You have only to ask him to give you a tune, and he plays and he plays and he plays. As a toy for your children, he's perfectly sweet. There's nothing so good in the shops. Here's the worm. There's nothing so good in the shops. You've only to tickle the soles of his feet, and he hops and he hops and he hops. He can't be fierce, exclaimed the head of all the cops. Oh, he can't be very fierce, exclaimed the head of all the cops. And now, without excuse, I'd like to introduce this charming glowworm, lover of simplicity. She is easy to install on your ceiling or your wall. And although this smacks a bit of eccentricity, it's really rather clever, for thereafter you will never have the slightest need for using electricity, at which no less than 52 policemen cried, "If this is true, this creature'll get some fabulous publicity." And here we have Miss Spider, with a mile of thread inside her, who has personally requested me to say that she never met Miss Muffet on her charming little tuffet. If she had, she'd not have frightened her away. Should her looks sometimes alarm you, then I don't think it would harm you to repeat at least 100 times a day, I must never kill a spider, I must only help and guide her. There's the spider. And invite her in the nursery to play. The police all nodded slightly, and the firemen smiled politely, and about a dozen people cried, "Hooray!" And here's my darling ladybug, so beautiful, so kind. My greatest comfort since this trip began, she has 400 children, and she's left them all behind. But they're coming on the next peach, if they can. The cops cried, "She's entrancing." All the firemen started dancing, and the crowds all started cheering to a man. And now the silkworm, James went on, whose silk will bear comparison with all the greatest silks there are in Rome and Philadelphia. If you would search the whole world through, from Paraguay to Timbuktu, I don't think you would find one bit of silk that could compare with it. Even the shops in Singapore don't have the stuff, and what is more, the silkworm had, I'll have you know, the honor not so long ago to spin and weave and sew and press the Queen of England's wedding dress, and she's already made and sent a waistcoat for your president. Well, good for her, the cops cried out, and all at once a mighty shout went up around the Empire State. Let's get them down at once. Why wait? And the next chapter is chapter 38, and I'm going to stop there. We'll read the next another day.